Welcome to our webinar, everyone. HAMX in Action, a demo of ITS's newest hardware asset management program. We will be getting started. Our speaker today on the call has played a significant role in creating this offering. Ben LaChance, our technical consulting manager and an expert of this offering, and myself, Paul Dixon, as I serve as VP of Sales at ITS. We're incredibly excited for today's webcast. I will be opening with a brief explanation of what HAMX is, and then turn it over to Ben for about a 20-minute talk to provide further details and a demo on HAMX. So what is HAMX? HAMX is a services program to help asset managers deal with the chaos of their hardware environments. So how is this any different from our typical hardware asset management offerings? That's what we're here to talk about today. Let's get started. So the question is why we built it. And we really built it with these personas in mind: the IT directors, the asset managers, the ServiceNow platform owners, and the C-suite. So you may be asking yourself, what is this X factor? Well, X really stands for flexibility in a fixed fee offering. You know, we recognize that a fixed fee engagement can be restrictive to your organization. So we've developed 4 distinct offerings based on the needs of your organization, which we'll get into in a minute. Ben, let me ask you this. Why is it important, and what are the differences between these offerings?
Paul, that is a fantastic question. Obviously, our complete offering is intended to implement an end-to-end complete hardware asset management program for your organization, from request to disposal and everything in between. But we understand that a lot of our customers have different needs and may not be ready or able to actually implement that whole end-to-end program and process yet. Because of this, we've offered 3 less complete options so that we can take their priorities and budget into account. With our baseline offering, we have just the basic setup for your hardware asset management program. When you're ready to start getting things in order and start taking control so that you can control your spend and you can actually start doing hardware asset management instead of just talking about it, then the baseline is going to be for you. If you're ready to go a little bit past that and look at actually taking part in refresh and move past that first initial tier of maturity for hardware asset management, then the refresh option is going to be what you want to look at. Finally, if you have issues with security or data compliance, you may want to look at our secure option, because that is going to be taking into account our disposal and our end of life, where most of our security issues occur when we talk about hardware asset management.
Ben, I'm going to pass the floor over to you and ask if you could please walk us through a demo and show us the money.
Absolutely, Paul. As some of our eagle-eyed viewers have noticed, I'm actually not in ServiceNow right now because one of the big parts of our HAMX offering is actually outside of the ServiceNow tool. As many of you know, I'm sure, and as Gartner has told us repeatedly, most of hardware asset management is less about the tool and more about having processes in place. And a big part of any work that we do for our hardware asset management implementation is about building out processes for your organization. HAMX and our HAMX offering is a little bit different in that instead of building those out and going through to personalize them for your organization, we have a set of prescriptive processes, prescriptive best practice processes that we will bring in to your organization to tell you this is what you should be doing for hardware asset management. We know that it's very often very difficult to just jump in the deep end and design these processes when you don't even know what you should be doing in the first place. So what we will bring you is a full overview of the best practice hardware asset management lifecycle, which you can see an example of here on the screen right now, along with some descriptions for what each of those different steps is. And then we will break that down even further to look at specific processes. Many of these processes are replicated inside of ServiceNow with some level of tasks or automation, but it's really important that you keep an eye on the overall process, including steps and tasks that may happen outside of the tool. So that's what we're really trying to capture with this. On top of that, one of the big questions that we get asked for is general work notes. What do I do day to day? If I'm an asset analyst, if I'm an asset manager, what are the things that I'm actually supposed to do as part of this process, as part of this program, as part of hardware asset management? And that's where our work notes come in, where we go more into depth on these processes to provide notes about what the actual tasks are, what expectations are for what specific people are doing as they work on the hardware asset management program and tool to do hardware asset management. So now that we've gone over a little bit of what we do outside of the tool, let's actually get into what the tool does and what we do to set up the tool to work for your organization. So first and foremost, one of the biggest things that the hardware asset management professional tool brings to us that we leverage as part of HAMX is new reporting. If any of you have done asset management in ServiceNow prior to this, you know that reporting and dashboards were basically non-existent out of the box. At this point, though, with the HAM tool, we've brought in new reports and new dashboards so that you can actually get a good overview of your different models, your different assets, and important information about them in these dashboards. So first of all, we have data about our models, about ones that are up for end of life, about normalization on them, which I will talk about more in depth later, about what the life cycle state for them is. And of course, like all of our reporting and dashboards, we can click into that to get a better view of that specific information as necessary. We can also get a view into procurement as we are trying to source different pieces of infrastructure or different assets. We can see where we've purchased from vendors, if we have open requests that require sourcing, where our purchases are happening. Similarly, we can see what we have in inventory. Are we dealing with loaner assets? If yes, what's the status on them? What's our requests fulfilled from stock to date? So what are we actually pulling out of inventory? Do we have any transfer orders to transfer between different warehouses in our system? This is all data, of course, that again is showing on upfront on our dashboards in this easy to view and easy to interpret form. We've also added an in-use tab here as part of our HAMX offering that delves into the actual data in your asset repository. Do you have hardware assets that are not assigned, that are in use? Do you have assets that don't have a location? What category are those falling into? Are they active assets with unknown locations? Do we have assets assigned to inactive users? These are all questions with data integrity in our asset repository that we ask all the time. And previous to this, we haven't had a really good way to report that other than just a normal list of assets. But now we can actually get a view that we can quickly establish how our asset repository actually looks with regards to these important pieces of data. And then finally, we actually have a view into end of life for our assets. And that's end of life in a couple of different ways. So our assets that are nearing the end of their warranty, do we have assets that are currently in the state of being disposed, and what's the status on those? Lease contract expirations, warranty contract expirations. So we're actually looking past now just the assets themselves, but do we have any contracts on assets that are going to be expiring that we need to be taking into account? We're bringing this all together into this one dashboard for the first time. So now that we've looked at the initial reporting, let's dig into a little bit more what is informing this reporting and where it's coming from. One of the things that I said that we would talk about a little bit is normalization. And I'm going to switch over here to a model view, and this is a model for a specific computer that is in our demo system here. So this model is a Dell PowerEdge server T410. We've got a model number in here, we've got a name, we've got a manufacturer, and these are all things that can come in multiple different ways. They can come in from discovery. Somebody could enter these manually. They could be brought in from an advanced ship notice. All of those are different methods that we can bring this model information in, and many of them will bring in model information in different ways. The names may be different. The manufacturer name may be different. And one of the big problems up until this point has always been, how do we make sure that we don't get duplicate models in the system? And how do we make sure that we are actually doing model management with the same models across our entire system? And now HamX is leveraging the content library that ServiceNow is providing for the Ham Professional tool to do normalization on hardware models. That means that when we have things come in with, say, a different name, maybe it comes in as just a T410 through discovery, when really it should be a PowerEdge T410, that content library is going to be updated from ServiceNow, and when normalization runs, it will update the records to say, this is actually a PowerEdge T410. It will do this based off of model number, based off of name, and based off of a couple of different pieces of information, so that we can make sure that our model information is correct and up to date in the system without having to do any manual normalization. On top of that, talking about the content library, we can also talk about hardware model lifecycle data. This hardware model lifecycle data is something that is brought in from ServiceNow's content library, again, that they receive information on from the publisher or the manufacturer themselves. And what these dates are actual dates from the manufacturer for different lifecycle phases. So you can see we have general availability, end of support, end of sale, final end of life. These are all coming in from ServiceNow with the dates that these phases are actually being put into effect by the manufacturer. You can use this data to better drive how you are acting on these models yourselves as an organization. You can make decisions now based off of when the end of support from the manufacturer is, may drive your choice to actually retire this model and remove it from your environment itself, because there's no longer support that is being offered. So this is really great stuff that is coming in. It is automatically brought in as part of the hardware asset management content library integration, and it is something that is absolutely necessary for keeping your models in tip-top shape. Once we have our models that are in the content library dealt with, what do we do with anything that is not in the content library? That is a big question that we get asked a lot, because it's not always possible for everything to be in the content library. As hard as ServiceNow works and as many resources as they throw at it, there's always going to be things outside of that. There may be niche applications for niche appliances that are not ever covered. How do we deal with that? So the good news is that we can actually put in custom hardware products and custom hardware models, so that we can actually deal with those the same way that we would deal with anything else, but with these custom devices. So now that we've talked about hardware models, let's talk about our hardware asset repository a little bit. Our hardware asset repository looks basically the same as our normal hardware asset repository from non-hardware asset management professional ServiceNow. But we do have some additions as part of HamX and some additions as part of the base Hardware Asset Management Pro to better manage your assets. So first of all, we have a much tighter integration with disposals, and we have some disposal flows and tasks that we can deal with in the background to automate that. We have a tie-in with contracts that has more information. We have allocations listed, and we have actual audit information. We'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later. We also have built out some additional functionality for looking at things like what expected warranty dates are. These are things that we can automate as long as we have the necessary information, but out of the box ServiceNow doesn't deal with. So this kind of functionality to make asset managers' lives easier is what we've really focused on building out with the hardware asset management prescriptive offerings that we are demoing today. Now, speaking about tasks and managing assets and how that works, I do want to introduce you all to something new that has come out in the Quebec release of ServiceNow, which is asset tasks. Asset tasks are a new form of tasks in the ServiceNow ecosystem that is intended, like they sound like, to deal with asset management problems. So things like dealing with leased assets, sourcing assets, collecting assets once they need to be returned to stock. All of these things have now been separated out and now have their own place to go to when we're looking at completing tasks that need to be done for hardware asset management. On top of asset tasks, we also have new auditing functionality in ServiceNow as part of the hardware asset management tool. So some of you may be familiar with data certification or compliance audits in your CMDB. So we have good news, which is that same kind of audit functionality has now been brought to the hardware asset management side of ServiceNow. We can now build out audits and actually do inventory audits explicitly as part of hardware asset management. We can report on that. We can get results of those audits and see our expected versus not expected results. If we have any assets we weren't expecting, we can then create them. We can see if we've lost any assets that we can't find. We can also look at various states of assets. So this audit functionality is very exciting, something to help you keep your asset repository accurate and up to date. The final thing that I want to talk to you guys about today has to do with automation in asset management. One of the big shortcomings for ServiceNow's previous asset offerings was that it was very much a manual process. Even if we came in and we built out our processes, our external processes, and we came in and we set up the asset tool, there was very little actual automation going on and very little in the form of workflows to guide people in the tasks that they should be doing every day. So one of the really exciting parts of HAM and HAMX is that we now have a number of predefined workflows that are directed towards hardware asset management specifically. Now, we don't go into all of these workflows at for every level of our HAMX offerings, and the workflows that we actually configure and dig into is actually a major portion of what causes the differences between our four different HAMX offerings. But all of our offerings have some level of workflows that we go into to build out and make sure that they will work for your organization. So we have, again, a number of workflows. The biggest ones that we are very excited about is that we now have a standard hardware asset request workflow that we can direct all of our hardware requests through, that includes sourcing tasks, assignment tasks, and deployment tasks. We have an asset disposal workflow that can drive the asset disposal process from beginning to end. And we actually can ensure that we have all of our documentation that goes along with that disposal process, and that we're collecting it and that we're storing it in ServiceNow in a way that's easily accessible for future use as necessary. So on top of those big beginning and end of life flows, we also have some flows in the middle where we can look at things like leased assets. If you do any leasing, we want to make sure that those leased assets come back in time so that you're not being charged penalties on those, so that you're actually getting the full value of that lease out of the lease and not overpaying on something that just because something gets returned a couple days late. We have some loaner assets. So if you have hot swaps, say in your stockroom that you keep on hand so that you can easily pass a laptop out to somebody that needs it, maybe they're on site for a couple days and you want to give them a laptop while they're there. Now we have a loaner asset flow so that those can be requested and returned as necessary. We have some refresh flows. So if you do hardware refresh, maybe you need to refresh every 3 years for your standard desktop. There hasn't been a lot of options for automating that in the past. Well, now we have some workflows, some ready-built workflows to go in and configure for that hardware asset refresh. Again, all of these are out-of-the-box workflows, and as part of our HAMX, what we go and do is we tweak those so that our tasks are being assigned to the correct groups, and we know where our tasks are going and what we need to do with them, and we have the proper work instructions in them. So these all line up with the documentation that we were discussing earlier around our external processes. And really for our HAMX offering, what we are doing here is configuring these workflows so that they actually work for your organization and provide whatever necessary information we need for your organization in order for these to operate correctly. Finally, to wrap up, I want to hit on one more thing, which is inventory management. The inventory management application has been wildly expanded as part of HAMX. We have a whole lot more going on than we did in our vanilla hardware asset management ServiceNow implementation. So obviously we have our normal stock rooms. We are used to these. There's nothing really new about these in the HAM offering. But what we do have in the HAM offering that is new is we have expanded use of transfer orders, in that in the past, we were limited to doing one-line transfer orders or one-line updates per transfer order, and we can now do bulk updates for that. So we can now move tens or even hundreds of assets between stock rooms using bulk updates with minimal effort. We also have, again, I touched on loaner asset orders, where we can have orders for loaner assets. And finally, we have our disposal orders. Our disposal orders, again, we talked about a little bit, but these are really important in that they let us follow an actual path through our disposal process and ensure that all the necessary steps are taken. From gaining the approval that we need to actually dispose of assets, to getting the CODs that we need to attach to those assets. As you can see, we have one attached right up here at the top, to actually retiring the assets at the end of the disposal process to ensure that they've actually come to their end of life in the system and are marked correctly as retired and disposed of. So that's going to wrap up our demo for today, and I'm going to pass it back to Paul so that he can wrap us up for the whole webinar.
So you're hearing about what HAMX is, and you're probably asking yourself, is it right for me? So we came up with 4 distinct areas we think may help you give an idea if this is right for you. First one is you've already implemented HAM and it failed. Second one is you need a solution now and you need it fast. You don't want something that's going to cost you an arm and a leg. And lastly is you want something that provides a foundation for larger scale ITAM objectives later on. If you're looking at those 4 and they identify with you, you're probably a good candidate for HAMX. So now that we've talked a little bit about HAMX and you have a better understanding of what HAMX is, let me tell you about ITS. We are an elite ServiceNow partner, and we're incredibly proud of that, as well as a patron of the ITAM forum. We have an incredibly talented team of engineers, and we have a wide variety of industry experience. If you'd like to learn more about anything you've heard today from today's call, or you're interested in scheduling a demo, please visit www.itsdelivers.com www.norm.com/Hamex, and we'll be in touch ASAP. Lastly, I want to thank you for joining. And Ben, thank you for showing us the magic. Have a great day.